Oh, hey guys, it's me, Prairie from Pikes Peak Library District. Here in the studio at Library 21C. Seeing what I can do with this green screen here. I don't know if you guys have ever been to the studio, but this place has got quite a bit of equipment, hardware, software, lights. We got it all. If you're interested, you might want to come by. But that's a different story. Today I want to talk to you about quilts. You guys, today I'm reading this book I got in the collection. It's called The Quilts of G's Bin. And it's a beautiful book. It's a true story about a young girl, Nettie Young. She's from G's Bin, Alabama. Back when she was about 12 years old, she's got a bunch of scraps from her mom or grandma, and just started putting together some quilts. She didn't have any training. She didn't have a whole lot of stuff. She just had a bunch of pieces of material and some time on her hands, and she put together these beautiful quilts. We got a lot of material around here, old shirts, things we can upcycle. We do a lot of things here at the Makerspace with sewing machines, 3D printers, laser cutters. We got some stuff here. You guys want to come with me and see what we can offer you here at the library? The whole district. I got some things I want to show you. By the way, I'm gonna go visit the Mac today. They got some cool things going on down there. You could go there too. I've got my friend Tina from Rockrimmon. She's got a friend she'd like to introduce us to. She's been quilting in the community for years. We're gonna go see what she's got to offer. Then after that, I think we might have like a take and make. Take and make you could pick up here at the library. We're gonna show you how to do it up here in our makerspace with Lauren and Jen. It'll be great. I'll see you guys soon. Something about what we're
So
doing
what we're
here.
doing is these are picture frames, and I've cut notches in them at the top, and they have wound thread around, and then we're weaving. So with this particular one, we're going to be weaving one design on this side and another design on the other. So this class today is to introduce young people to weaving, and we're doing plain weave on a handmade loom by taking a picture frame, and I've notched the edges, and then we're just wrapping yarn around, and then we're weaving. And we've used half of a cone to put it in place. That's from an indigo dye class yesterday.
Ooh, tell me more.
So we get big vats of indigo plant dye and white t-shirts or yarn or fabric, and we dunk that in. And when it comes out, it's bright green, but there's an oxidation process, and it turns it these blue colors.
So you made the yarn that you guys are using.
Not this yarn, but very similar yarn, and it will be this color.
That is amazing.
White yarn, yeah.
That is amazing.
And then on fingernails, it's this color.
Let me see that again up close. Oh, I love it.
It'll wear off in about a week, but my hand was purple up until here, so.
And now you have a story to tell.
Yes, yes.
I do, I love it.
You're supposed to wear gloves, but
what's the fun in that?
there's no fun in that.
Yes.
Yeah.
tell me all about this place.
I mean, we don't know all about it, but
Okay, well tell me what you've learned so far.
we learned
Where do you,
nothing.
Where do you get your yarn? You know where the yarn is.
Yeah.
Show me where the yarn is. All right.
So the yarn to start your looms is over on that shelf, and the yarn that you use to loom is over on this shelf. And there are baskets where you can get your yarn. There are all these different shelves.
That's the color you want?
Yeah.
So they let you choose any color you want, huh?
They let you choose any color you want, unless if you put it back where it belongs afterwards.
Nice.
Like if I'm done with this one, I put it back where it belongs. I don't just put it anywhere I want it.
That's a really good practice.
And this is how you start your loom. Yeah, you
What is that?
wrap the yarn around it 8 or 6 times, however many strings you want it to go on your loom. But you mainly get all your loom stuff from this area.
I love this.
And these are our actual looms.
Let me
These are the big looms where you can make rugs, carpets, blankets, anything you want, basically.
I love this. So this is the same idea as your little looms, yes?
Yes, except bigger.
Ah.
They're made out of wood and more easier to cope with. They're kind of easy. You use your feet rather than your hands to loom it.
I love this. So you can take lots of classes and come in here and do this and make the biggest blanket you want.
Yeah, you can make the biggest blanket you can ever want.
I love that.
And the fuzziest. Big beads, and then tiny beads, entire box of nail polish that she uses on like these.
Yeah?
She like colors them. I mean, looks like these are containers to put your beads in if you're doing them. And look at this. I guess these are if you want to put rings on your necklaces. Like this one. Just go into here. Look at this one I found. And there are all these different colors. And there are all these different colors and sizes. And this.
Beautiful.
It's like this.
Wow. You guys, we could get pretty crafty in here, couldn't we?
And then some more containers. Ooh, there's something glittering in the bottom drawer. Look at that.
Oh my gosh. What is that? Oh, it's like bigger beads.
They look like old gears that are like painted.
I love it.
Yeah, they're old gears that are painted.
This is very artistic. Make some of these cool things ourselves. What do you think? That sounds good? All right. Say bye, guys.
Bye.
See you next time.
See you next time. I hope you visit the MAC. MAC.
Excellent. We will.
Hi, I'm Tina with Pikes Peak Library District, and I'm here today interviewing Janine. And by the way, this microphone that I'm holding and the camera we're using is available free for checkout at Library 21C. Hi, Janine. Thank you for inviting us to your home today.
Hi, Tina.
We're so excited to be here with you.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a bit about what's on the table and behind us?
Well, I'm a quilt maker, and that's sort of my passion. And these are all quilts that I've made myself. And I've pieced them, put them together, and then I also have a long arm quilting machine. And I'm able to put all the designs on the quilt as well.
Janine, can you tell me, how do kids get started if they have an interest in quilting?
Well, one of the things that there's lots of online classes available just about anywhere. You can also get books. You can find, go to your local quilt shop. They may have classes that are available. And if you're even like me, you probably may have learned your sewing skills from your mom or your grandma or someone in your family or a friend. There are also local groups, quilt guilds, that oftentimes there'll be people in there that will offer to instruct as well.
Those are wonderful resources that are available to everyone through the Pikes Peak Library District as well. And Janine, I know that we'll be going into your sewing room next. Could you point out the materials or tools that would be important for a beginner to use?
Yes, I will be happy to do that.
That sounds great.
So the first thing that you'll probably need is a sewing machine, which is right there. It has thread, of course, and then you have your pins and your scissors and other little gadgets here, but that's the basics. Some cutting implements, so we have a cutting mat, and then we have a rotary cutter, and that is used with the rulers to cut the various shapes of the fabric for putting together. And then you'd also need a ironing board and an iron.
Does this quilt tell a story?
Yes, it does. It's called a road trip quilt, and it's just sort of depicts all the things that you would maybe see on a road trip. So there's trees, and there's mountains, and stars, and waves, and flowers, directional arrows kind of pointing all the different ways that you would go. So this kind of tells a story. Another quilt that might tell a story I've seen other folks do is if they have a bunch of t-shirts that they've collected over the years and they make a quilt out of the t-shirts. Those can tell stories. But as far as inspiration, a lot of times for me, it's just I'll be looking in magazines or be at one of my quilt meetings or just see something around that I really like and say, oh, hey, let's say I want to make that. And so that's how I get my inspiration. Or it might be a need. It might be, well, I need a table runner, or I need a new quilt for my bed, or something along those lines. And then that's actually fulfilling a need when you are thinking about what to do for a quilt.
And so I notice as we look carefully at this quilt, there's a number of colors, and it seems like patterns almost geometric, and the patterns seem to be repeated in certain places. Is that part of the artistry of quilting?
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's really just a matter of, we kind of make jokes about being a quilter is that we buy all this material and then we cut it up in little tiny pieces and then we sew it all back together in something different so that it just creates something else. And colors, it really just colors is whatever you like. There's no set rules on any colors that are needed or rules as far as that goes. It's really just kind of whatever you like.
And you had mentioned something about a helper. Her name is Agnes.
Yes, I have that's sort of the second part of the quilting process or quilt making process is once you get all your pieces sewn together, you kind of start making these blocks out of all the pieces that you bought, and you use your instructions in your pattern to make yourself blocks that you sew together. So that quilt is all just different blocks. When you sew them together, you get your top, and then you can take your backing and your batting and you put that all together, and then you take it and you actually do the quilting process, which that process is really just getting all the sandwich layers to join together. So you have your back and your front and the batting in between, and that the quilting process brings that all together.
So when you talk about these blocks and these shapes, it almost sounds like it might be something of interest to people who enjoy puzzling or putting puzzles together. Is there a correlation between an interest in that and quilting?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It is really just putting pieces together. That's exactly what it is. And I'm also have always liked math. And so math comes into play a lot because you have all the different dimensions and you know, that you have to cut so many pieces out of this size of material. So it has a lot to do with math as well. So those math skills come into play.
And it looks like there's some geometry involved too.
Oh yes, you can see it's almost all geometry if you sat here and really looked at it. Triangles and squares and rectangles and all kinds of things. Yeah,
Really
everything you saw in school when you were a kid.
Such beautiful work. I'm really enjoying just looking at this.
Thank you.
I feel like I could go on a road trip now, vacation.
Yeah, there you go.
So we've traveled to a different room in the house that's made exclusively for you, for your quilting, by your husband. Can you tell us more about this process that you've gone through?
Yeah, this is my long arm quilting machine, and this is the machine that does the magic in attaching the different layers of the quilt together. So you have your top, and then you have your batting, and then you have your back, and this just melds all the layers together to make your actual quilt. So this is a long arm quilting machine, and her name is Agnes. She was named after my grandmother, and I have a computerized version that really just does the work for me. So do you want me to go ahead and turn it on?
Yes, tell us how it works.
So this just has a pattern on it, and it just kind of moves around by itself according to the pattern that's on there. And I'm sort of a nerd at heart, and so this actually appealed to me because it was computerized and artistry all in one. So that's my Agnes, and she does quilting and finishes up my quilts for me.
So much for this tour and telling us more about quilting and sewing and how to get started as well too. We appreciate all that you've opened up to us today, and the creativity and just the information that you even use math when you're doing these types of quilting projects as well too. The other thing we were wondering about was, since we have all these free resources at Pikes Peak Library District at our makerspaces, is it something that can turn into a career or to a possible business for our teens that may be interested?
Well, sure. Quilting is, there's a lot of different things you can do with it. So you don't have to make huge projects like that one, or this, you can make small projects like this, or like a little table runner, or just a little something that maybe goes under a lamp or a wall hanging. They don't have to be huge, and if you find something small like the one we showed you before with the kites,
yes,
that's small, and that's a nice little project. Sometimes people sell those at craft shows or whatever. And then for me, I don't sell my quilts, but I offer my services for the quilting. Agnes does the quilting. And so that's sort of my side job, is to quilt for other people that need to have their quilts finished. And you can definitely make a living at that and do very well.
Well, I appreciate you spending this afternoon with us. We've learned so much from you, and we look forward to seeing more of your projects.
Thank you. Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Hi, I'm Jennifer from 21C, and today I'm going to show you around our makerspace. If you've ever wanted to make an invention or create something new, the makerspace is a great place to do that. And we'll start by looking at our 3D printers, which are right over here. So one of the main features of our space is 3D printing. A 3D printer works by heating up plastic, also called filament, and extruding it through a nozzle onto this hot plate. It builds the plastic up in layers, so that way you can make almost anything that you can think of, like this little castle, or this number 2, or maybe even a part for a vacuum or something else that has broken. So we also have a laser engraver and cutter, which we use to make the embroidery templates that you'll be using for your project today. This machine uses a focused laser to burn into things like wood, acrylic, and sometimes even things like fabric and paper. And this big machine here is our CNC. It works kind of like the laser does, but instead of using a laser, it uses drill bits to engrave and cut into wood to make things like this sign, where we've cut the things out on the CNC and inlaid a darker wood to make it stand out. To use the makerspace, you'll need to be at least 9 years old and accompanied by a parent or guardian until you're 12 years old, unless you're here to use the space as part of a program. If you have any questions, feel free to visit us in the space or learn more on our website. Thanks so much for watching, and take it away, Lauren.
Thanks, Jennifer. I'm Lauren, and today we're going to be learning a little bit about hand sewing and sewing our own custom embroidery charm. So hand sewing is a really useful skill to use. You can use it for practical things like mending tears in your clothing, or hemming up your pants, or sewing on a button. Or you can use it for creative things like embroidery, or cross stitch, or even sewing your own books. So there are a lot of really cool things you can do once you know how to sew. Today we're going to be learning a few basic stitches, and then we're going to be learning how to draw up a pattern and make our own charm. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so before we get started, there are just a few supplies that we're going to need. First up, you're going to need a charm to sew on, embroidery thread to sew with. You should have one that's white or black, and then one that's a bright color, a threader, a needle, and a template that you can plan your pattern on. It's also good to have a pair of scissors, and then something you can use to draw with. It could be a pencil, a pen, colored pencils, crayons, anything you can use to plan out your pattern. I also have a cup of water here. This is going to be used for threading the needle, but if you didn't want to use a cup of water, you could always spit on the thread. All right, so now that you have all your supplies gathered, let's go ahead and jump in. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is get our needle set up with our thread. So what we're using today is called embroidery floss, and it's actually made up of 6 tiny threads that are twisted together. You can kind of see how you can separate them. And a lot of times when you're sewing with embroidery thread, you'll actually want to separate out just a few of them. Thankfully, we're doing these big wooden charms today, so we can just leave it twisted and we'll use the whole thing as it is. Now, before you start sewing, you're going to have to cut off the length of thread you want to use. And 2 feet is a good amount. For me, it's about for my arm, the length of my arm here. Because you want your thread to be long enough that it doesn't fall off the needle, but not so long that it's constantly getting tangled. So once you have measured out your 2 feet, just go ahead and snip it off. And then you're ready to thread your needle. Now, for threading your needle, there's 2 different ways you can do it. One is the old-fashioned way, which is you either spit on it or dip it in water, and that will help the 6 different strands I was talking about really stick together. Otherwise, it's going to be tough to get them through the eye of the needle. And then once you've done that, you just kind of poke it through. This can be a little bit tough. So what you'll need to do once you've wetted the thread is stick it through the eye of the needle. So all you'll do is line them up and then just poke it through. And then you'll want to pinch it with the other side, pull it through, and leave about 4 inches dangling through here. And the reason we leave this little tail is because it would be horrible to have to do that whole poking process again if we accidentally yanked it out of the eye. So we want to leave this here as a safety measure. Now, it can be really tricky to get it through the eye of the needle, so there's another cheating way that we can do it that's a lot easier. Let me show you that now. What we're going to do is use something called a threader. And it's this funky looking little guy. Now this wire you see, that's now our eye of the needle, which is about 3 times as big as it was before, so it makes things way easier. What you do is you poke that through the needle instead, so now we have this massive eye we can use instead of the tiny one, right? And then it's no trouble at all to pull our thread through. Once it's hanging off, watch, I'm just gonna pull the threader backwards to the needle, and just like that, voila, our needle's been threaded, no pain at all. So the threaders are really an awesome way, especially with needles that have smaller eyes, to get it on there with no pain at all. Okay, now we're ready to go ahead and start sewing. So normally if I was sewing a project, I would tie a knot at the end of the thread. But you can see the holes on our charm are really big. So that's not gonna work super well. Even if I tied a huge knot, it would just pull through, right? So instead what we're going to be doing is we're going to be leaving a little tail dangling underneath when we start sewing our first stitch, and then we'll tie it off at the beginning so that it holds our entire project in place. So I'm gonna show you guys how we start our project. For right now, we're just sewing practice stitches, so you can start in any hole. We just wanna get used to the motion of sewing. What you'll do is you'll poke your needle up from the bottom through one of the holes, and you'll pull it through. This is the tail I'm gonna leave dangling underneath so that I can tie a knot. Then I'm gonna go down through the next hole. You can see that there. And holding on to this dangling bit, I'm gonna pull it through. So now you can see we have our very first stitch right here, and underneath we've got this dangly bit of thread. Now there's 2 things we could do, right? One is we could hold this dangly bit of thread down against the back and we can sew over it. That's actually how you start sewing in cross stitch, which was that pattern I showed you guys before. But what we're gonna do to make things a little easier is just to tie a simple square knot. So left over right, then right over left to anchor this in place. So let's do that now. First, we're gonna take this edge of the knot and fold it over and pull it through the eye, just like tying your shoes, right? And then we're gonna pull that tight. And now we're gonna go from the opposite direction, pull that thread through the loop, pull that tight, and now our thread is anchored onto the back here. And we can take our scissors and we can just snip off all that extra thread. There we go. So now we don't have to worry about our project falling off, and we can keep sewing feeling safe and secure in that. Now this was just one simple stitch, right? If we kept going like this, coming up through the next hole, going down through the hole after it, what we've done is called a straight stitch. It's the simplest stitch you'll learn in sewing, and it's just that simple motion, come up through one hole, go down through the next, come up through one hole, go down through the next. That's a really great stitch to know, especially for when you're trying to mend things, right? But you can see when I do that, it leaves a little gap between these two. That's not a huge deal for some things, but if we're trying to sew a pattern and we want a straight line, we're not gonna want these gaps between them, right? So I'm gonna show you another stitch, and this stitch is called the back stitch. And it's called that because it kind of makes it look like you're going backwards when you sew it. So first things first, I'm gonna go ahead and undo this straight stitch. The great thing about using these wooden charms is it's really easy to go back up through the hole we just went down through. And just like that, I've removed the last stitch. So if you make any mistakes while you're sewing, it's gonna be really easy to fix them. So now we're gonna go back down through this hole as well. And just like that, we're back to the first stitch we put down. Now I'll show you the back stitch. So before, just like before, we're gonna come up through the next hole and we're gonna pull the thread all the way through. But this time, instead of going forward, just like the name sounds, we're gonna go backward. So come down through this hole, pull it taut, and now you can see there's no gap between the two. And then we'll just repeat that. We'll come up through the next hole, we'll go forward and pull it through. We'll come up through the next hole, if our hands will stop shaking, and we will then go backwards again. And by going backwards every other stitch like that, you can see we have this perfect line. That's going to be really useful if you need to sew straight lines in your pattern, or if you want to make sure that your design doesn't have any gaps in it. So congratulations, now you know two of the most important stitches in hand sewing, and that's the straight stitch and the back stitch. But now that we're done sewing, we need to tie off. So I'm going to show you how we're going to tie off on these charms. Normally, like I said, when we were doing sewing on cloth, we would just tie a knot at the end of the thread here and snip it. We're still going to do that with the wood, but it's going to be a little bit tougher because again, we have these really big holes, right? So we need to make sure that we secure it under the last stitch we sewed so that it doesn't just go through the hole and fall off. It would suck to lose all of the hard work that we just put in, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over so I can see the back. And then I'm going to poke the tip of my needle up through that last little stitch that I sewed. And I'm going to pull it through until I just have this little loop-de-loop. And then I'm going to put my eye of my needle through that loop and pull it taut. And just like that, I now have a little knot at the end of my thread. And that's nice and easy. If I want to, I can make another little loop and tie another knot there, just to make sure that it's extra tight. Oh, there we go. Right there, and we'll just push it down to the end of our thread. And then once it is nice and secure, take your scissors, snip it off, and just like that, you have your length of thread. So you finished sewing your little sampler. If you want to sew your actual charm on the same charm you used for this practice project, it's really easy. All you do is just cut off the end of the thread and it'll yank right through the holes and you'll be able to start with a fresh slate. So let's go ahead and put this aside and think a little bit about what it is that we want to sew today. If you want to use two different colors of thread in your pattern, what you'll do is you'll tie off with the first color once you finish sewing with it, and then you'll do that same threading and tying on process that we showed before, and just start the whole thing over with the second color until you've sewed both designs. So when it comes to planning out our charm, we have printed these little patterns for you so that you can draw your design out in advance and you can kind of see what it's going to look like before you start sewing. So what you'll do is you'll take your pencil or crayon or colored pencil, whatever it is you have, and you're just going to draw in whatever you want to sew. So you can see I already drew here. I want to sew my first initial, the letter L, onto this little rectangular charm here. So what I've done is I have drawn a line connecting these so that I know I want to sew down through all these holes using that back stitch we just learned to make an L shape. And that way I'll have a little pendant that has my initial on it. So you can go ahead now and plan out the design that you want to make. Just remember, you need to be connecting the two holes when you draw, right? Because you're only going to be able to see the threads that go between these two holes. So just make sure that you think how your design will look once you've actually started sewing. Once you've got your design ready, we are good to start. Now I've decided that for my charm, I'm gonna put white and blue thread through my needle so that I get this cool multicolor effect while I'm sewing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna measure out another length of thread, just this time using the white, snip it off, and then I'm going to use that threader tool to put it through the same needle. And this is something I could again do it by hand poking it through the eye, but with one thread already in there, it's gonna be a little tough. So instead, I'm gonna poke the threader through the needle just like we did before. I'm gonna poke the thread through that threader, leaving a tail, right? And then I'm gonna pull it back through the needle once again until it goes through, put the threader away, And then now I'm just gonna make sure that these two threads are the same length. There we go. And there's gonna be a slight difference in the tail. We can just go ahead and snip off that extra difference. That's no problem. So now I have my wonderful multicolor thread and I'm ready to start sewing my initials. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna look at my pattern and see, okay, I started on the second hole down on the second row in. So I need to find that now on this charm, and I know it's right here. So this is the place that I need to come up through the charm, leave that tail dangling, right, because I'm gonna have to tie a knot, and then come down through the next hole. So I'm gonna hold on to the tail, I'm gonna come down through the next hole. So here's my lovely first stitch. And now I'm gonna flip it upside down and I'm gonna tie that knot just like we did the first time when we were doing our practice stitches. Let me set that aside. And it's a little bit tougher since I'm using 2 threads this time. So it may take me a second to get it through. Pull it tight. And now we'll go in the other direction, right? So we did left over right, now we've got to do right over left. Poke it through the hole again, pull it taut, and now we have that knot at the back that's gonna hold this steady, and I'm just gonna snip off all that extra thread that we do not need. And I can trim this a little closer at the end too. There we go. Now we're ready to start our sewing. So as I sew, I'm gonna follow along with my pattern. If you have something like a highlighter, you could highlight the stitches you've done so that you know how far you are in your design. Now it's not too big a deal because mine is really simple, right? It's just 2 straight lines. But if yours is a little more complicated, it can really help you to keep track of where you are in your pattern. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go down sewing this back stitch, right? So coming up through this next one, pulling it through, coming down, pulling it through, so that I have this straight uninterrupted line. And I'm gonna go down until this second to last hole here. There we go. So you can see it's a really simple motion, coming up and then just going down backwards to make sure that we're not skipping any stitches. Nice. And now it's time for me to turn. So all I'm gonna do is come up at this next one, right? And then go backwards horizontally across instead of vertically. And then now you see I have that nice little turn so I can make the L. So again, we'll come up, we'll go back down, and there you have it. There is my finished design. And I can check here, yep, I went to the last stitch at the edge, so I know that I finished. And just like before, we're gonna end it the way we did, where we come up through the last stitch that we sewed on the back, we pull our thread through, and then we poke our needle through that little loop-de-loop and pull it tight. And that leaves us with this nice tight knot at the end. We can sew a second one, or tie a second one if we're worried about it. I'm not too worried about it, so I'm just gonna snip it. And now when I flip it over, I've got my finished L pendant, so I could make this into a keychain or a necklace or anything that I wanted here. So I hope you had fun making your own design. I would love to see how it turned out. You can always share it with us by tagging your pictures, hashtag PPLD Take and Make on social media, and we would love to see them. Hopefully you learned some really useful skills today with hand sewing, and you're excited to try your own projects. If you want to try out some more sewing in the Makerspaces, come see us anytime, and we'd love to give you a tour of the space and show you around. Thanks for joining us.